Hi, you guys. Welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear, and I am your Goatee for this evening. Uh, so I didn't really have any plans for this video. I lost my headset, so I hope the audio is going to be okay. So I apologize if the audio is bad. But, it's just kind of a lazy afternoon. A little bit stormy outside, it's cooler than it's been. I'm just here doing some reading, drinking my coffee. And I kind of was thinking I would just visit for a little bit, if that's okay. If you want to just listen to me talk about stuff. So I left Christianity. I grew up Christian. My parents are pretty standard conservative Christian when I was growing up. Like I said, like in a number of videos, that we weren't allowed to really do Halloween. We really weren't allowed to do a lot of that typical fundamentalist. The fundamentalist Christianity. They have a lot of fear about a lot of things. So things like Casper and what is now. I was pre Harry Potter, but should Harry Potter have come up when I was a kid? That would have been on the chopping block for sure. Definitely not allowed to do that. So it was kind of an interesting. My childhood was fairly interesting. I was always someone who believed in God. Like, my mom would tell stories about how when I was 4, I would have these very casual conversations with her about what God and I were talking about and what we were working on. So I would say that I was fairly unique in that from the very beginning, my relationship with God was always my own. Like, it was never, like a lot of people have that transitional period, like in high school, middle school, high school, early college, where where your kids kind of break off from you. They're no longer, there's like a point in that development where it's no longer about mom and dad. It's more about where the kid is in their community. And so a lot of times, as kids grow up, they split off and they do their own thing for a while, and then they come back to the church later if they're going to. I had kind of something similar, but it was my relationship with God was always my own. My beef was always with the church. I remember, like my mom, for example, she was always kind of labeled a heretic. Even as conservative Christian as she was, she described like these really horrific dreams she had when she was a little girl. Like being like 6, 7, 8 and having these nightmares of walking down the street and watching someone just burst into flames. And she would describe, like as an 8-year-old girl, like the smell and the skin bubbling up and just these really horrible, just disgusting dreams that she said that there was no earthly reason why an 8-year-old would know that. And so she always had a real hard time with the idea that you would go to hell and burn forever for being sinful. It didn't seem to be in the character of God to have that happen. Well, a number of times growing up, going to church and stuff, my mom would be asked to leave because she wouldn't stand for that worldview. She would create a fit. She would point out how it's not supported in the Bible, it's not supported in the character of God, at least in the way the Christians wanted to portray God. And so I grew up fairly it's really weird because, so on one hand, I grew up knowing that there's inconsistencies in the doctrine of Christianity. And by Christianity, I mean the religious system. The way the religious system of Christianity works. On the other hand, I really loved God, and still being a young person, even though, my relationship with God was my own, you listen to those who came before you. And if your parents or the people in religious of any kind of authority, whether it be your parents or a pastor or whatever, they say God is like this, well, then you just accept whatever has been given to you. And so coming back to that point, where you get to a certain age and you start breaking off, I had a habit of asking really inconvenient questions when I was a kid. I had a real hard time socially. I really didn't fit in. I was made fun of relentlessly as a child growing up, especially ironically, in the religious circles. I was made fun of. And because I didn't fit in at all. And religious organizations really didn't like me very much. And so I had this, I would be, because I was so passionate and I knew who God was and it was a part of my life, and I had pretty good leadership skills, I was always immediately put into church leadership, but then I would start saying something heretical, you don't burn forever, and then I was immediately, I guess you could say I was written off the schedule. I was never actually fired from church leadership. They just kind of stopped using me for things. But I always had a really strong pull towards paganism, particularly the Druids and those old religions. And it was a really strong pull. A really strong pull. If you've had the experience of being told something by God before, there's something that it's kind of it's not even really like specific words. It's just like this anxiety, almost borderline panic, where it's do it now, do this thing I'm telling you to do. And it was building and building and building for a long time. And I started getting disillusioned with the church. They would preach, one of the big turning points for me was they would preach that things like masturbation was this horrible thing. You're a very dirty person for doing it, and you're the worst person ever, and you're going to go straight to hell, and God hates it, and you have all this shame and all this stuff that's put on top of you. And then I went and researched for myself and found out that it's not even mentioned in the Bible. It's mentioned twice, and both times in the context in which it was written, it had nothing to do with what they were saying it was. And so I kind of, once I realized that they were kind of full of crap on that, I made the decision to leave. And it was really scary because, you're taught your whole life that if you aren't a Christian, you burn. Right? There was many, many, many years of mind control and fear. Your brain gets hardwired into that stuff. And, I wanted to know, again, I loved God. I wanted to know who God was for God's sake. And when I left, I told God that there was two things I knew for sure. I'm going to completely assume I know nothing. I'm going to start with a complete blank slate. I know nothing at all. But God, I know two things. I know that truth is a constant. I know that in my gut. I can feel it in my chest. I know that truth is a constant. So it doesn't matter what I believe. Either it's going to be true or it's not going to be true. And I know that I love you and I know that you exist because I've experienced you personally. And with that, I left. I left Christianity. And I had a lot of fear I had to deal with. And I was doing it on my own. My parents were still very conservative Christian. My mom, I think, may have still even been going to church at that time. I had one pagan friend who was a friend of my dad's, and she was awesome. I gave her a call one night, and I kind of poured out my soul, saying, "Look, listen, I'm leaving the church, and I don't know what to do. I need someone to talk to." And she was there for me. And pagan, for those of you who don't know, it's just a really umbrella term. It was coined during the Roman occupation of, everywhere. And pagan just simply meant someone who wasn't part of the Church of Rome, or outside of. Barbarian, like pagan and barbarian, were labels given to anyone who was outside the Roman doctrine of things. So it's not really a specific religion. It's just you're just kind of outside of the Church of Rome, which is essentially what a lot of the modern religious organizations are still. They're still basically the Church of Rome. So, I started with nothing. I had a lot of really rough nights, a lot of fear. I wanted to know God, and I didn't know what was true, and I looked at a lot of stuff. I was pretty open-minded. I researched Druidry. That's kind of what this little pamphlet is here. It's kind of an online Druid course. I participated in Mormonism for a little bit, for a brief moment. Was even got so far as being baptized Mormon. But the problem with a lot of these organizations is that when you really start asking really tough questions, there's like two phases of knowing things, of learning. You have the download stage where you don't know enough, so you accept what people are trying to tell you as truth. Then eventually you know enough to be able to start asking questions about those things you've already learned. And then a lot of times things just fall apart at that point. And that's what happened with me with the Mormons. Still the nicest people I've ever met. Mormons are no one has ever gone out of their way to make me feel so at home. And so, and speaking as someone who's been an outcast my entire life, that was a very special feeling. So I still have, to this day, even though I'm not a Mormon at all, I still have a very special place in my heart for the Mormon community and what they gave me through all that. I looked at Wicca, and I looked at, I became a practicing shaman for a long time. I'm still technically practicing, but I don't have a practice or see clients or anything like that. And so slowly over time, you start building this kind of a working worldview that takes a lot of work. And that's why they get frustrated when you're trying to convert somebody. Think of yourself. The beliefs you have right now are the product of years and years and years and years and years of work. Years of work, right? And having someone come along and say, well, what you believe is wrong, that's really hard. Not many people could take that laying down. And so, I think one of the benefits I had was that I was willing to be wrong the whole time. With that said, I spent a lot of time in study. And I had this really lovely system built out that I thought that I could work with. And then, what's really interesting about all of this is I've always been a fanboy for the Vikings. I loved the Norse. I loved the Norse culture. I loved pickled herring. You know, it was just a really cool thing for me, and it never really even occurred to me to even look into Norse mythology at all. And so I looked at it a couple of times, but I never really focused on it. And so I came to a point where I wanted to know God. This whole thing, the reason I did any of this stuff, this doesn't represent almost any of the material I've read. This is just what I have now after moving like 1,000 times. I did all this because I wanted to know who God was, and I kept struggling with it. Like, God, who are you? Are you Osiris? Are you Tammuz? I come across who's Jesus? What's the mystery behind Jesus? I asked this question. I really desperately wanted to know who God was. And what really changed for me, and this is something that might happen to you or may not, but in my experience, this has happened to other people when they've asked this question and meant it. I essentially said, God, I want to know the truth no matter what the cost. And the no matter what the cost is the key word in that. So what happened for me, which is kind of funny, is my cousin Colton sent me this video about the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are a group of Sumerian gods who came. They were made popular. They've been known for a long time, but they were really made popular by this guy by the name of Sitchin. And in recent years, they've even become so popular that there's even kind of almost a de facto religion forming among people who believe that the Anunnaki were the original gods of the earth, and because they came from this other planet, Nibiru, and all of this stuff. Well, I wasn't really prepared for what I was about to get myself into. I asked God, I want to know the truth no matter what the cost. Like the next day, like literally the next day, my cousin sends me this thing. And it's talking about how the Anunnaki were our creators, and how we were slaves, and just all of this stuff. And which was more, there's there's archaeology to back this up. There's history to back this up. And I wasn't really prepared for that. And I was devastated. Because, like most people, I still had I guess you could say, a Constantinian Judeo-Christian construct of the way the universe works. There's a very specific school of thought that that all information kind of gets filtered through, and those things are baked in. They're baked into your brain, and you don't really realize they're there. That you don't really realize those filters are there, unless they get hit with something hard enough that it kind of shatters the programming. And and that's exactly what happened with this. Is I was like, there's no way that the creator of all things, this God that I've loved my whole life, is a space alien. There's no way. And it was devastating to my brain and to my mind and to my spirit. It broke me. It really, and I mean that in a very literal way, it literally broke me. My wife could attest to that, like where I would just lay in bed for days. And it was, when you get hit with something that is really hard to reconcile, you really have to, it's hard. It's devastating. It's hard, especially when it's something you love so much. I couldn't, even though I was still trying to figure out who the God that I loved was, there was no separating whoever it is from my spirit. It was like interwoven. Like I said, I knew who he was when I was 4. It was, the only way I can say it is like wherever I came from, when I came to Earth, I brought him with me. Right? I already had this intuitive knowledge about who this God is, even though I clearly forgot everything about it when I came here. And so the idea that it could have been a space alien was, you question, okay, well, is life even should I even bother with it? I'm not going to kill myself, but what the hell is the point if this thing that I've lived for my whole life is not what I thought it was? And I remember the day it happened. Well, I don't remember the date, but I remember sitting at my my at my wife's work. She runs a music school, and I'm just sitting there like a broken person. I say, I've used this analogy before. It's like you're sitting on the floor in front of everything you've built, and it's on fire, and so it's the smoking rubble, and you're like, what's gonna? I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do now. And so I remember hearing this voice in my head after a few weeks of suffering, of really suffering, saying, was it worth it? Was the truth worth it? And for the very first time in my life, I didn't have a very good Sunday school answer. A lot of times what we do when God tells us something or asks us something, they say, you tell the person who's asking the question what you think they want to hear. Like if I was back in Sunday school, you tell the person who's asking the question what you think they want to hear. Well, who did this? Well, Jesus did that, or Noah did that, or God did that. And so you grow up doing the same thing. God asks you what you want, and you tell him what you think God wants to hear. You're not very honest with God. And for the first time ever, I learned that there is consequences for what you ask for, and that there's consequences for the way you ask it. And you don't have a good answer, right? You don't have a good answer anymore. That part of you has been broken. There is no Sunday school answer anymore, and I had to answer honestly for the first time. Was the truth worth it? Because look what it did. Look what when presented with this information that completely shattered me. Was it worth it? Was it worth being shattered over? And I had to wrestle with that. And eventually, I had to ask myself the honest, hard question is, would I rather believe the lie and be comfortable, or would I rather know the truth and be uncomfortable? And eventually I settled on, despite all the suffering that happened because I asked that damn question, I want to know the truth no matter what the cost. I really had to despite of all that, I said I wanted to know the truth. The truth was worth it. I'd rather, if I was made by a space alien, I would rather know that. I'd rather know what's really happening than have been fed a lie. And it was after that when you find out that the Anunnaki themselves believed in a creator of all things. After I had this conversation, it's like God then came back and said, okay, I know you're serious now. And I could give you back everything you've lost, essentially, and now we have something to work with. We've broken the paradigm in your brain. You've been destroyed, and now you could be rebuilt. And it was after that I started, the Anunnaki, though it was the thing that started it all, was kind of the thing. I kind of left it, I guess you could say. I moved on to other stuff. I started reading mythology. I started getting into symbology. Weirdly enough, I started getting into heathenism. At the time, I didn't even know there was a religion based around it. I just knew that I really resonated with the god Odin, and I didn't know why I resonated with the god Odin, but I did. And so I started reading pretty heavily about the Norse mythology, reading, like poems like the Havamal. You could find, if you're interested, you could find almost any of the Norse poetry online for free on PDF form. And it was at some point in there when I, asking the right questions, I caught someone's attention, and they introduced themselves to me, and one thing led to another, and I continued asking good questions, and I continued to seek and prove that I wanted to know more. And then it was at that point when I was invited to join the Norse Mysteries. I know it sounds like I'm being cryptic. There's certain things that are part of the mysteries that are just kind of kept secret. I know I teach a lot of this stuff, but there's things that are just considered holy, and you don't really, you don't reveal names of the people who teach you. There's mystery schools like to keep their secrets, and even though I've been told to teach some of this stuff, a lot of it is still symbolic, and a lot of it is still hidden. And so that's why I'm always a little cryptic around like who was that who taught me and how all that process happened. So, as the Gnostics say, that's kind of how I came to the waters, I suppose. 27 minutes, okay. The cup is getting cold. So, back in 2013, I slipped and hit my head. Right on the middle of the forehead. You kind of, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a dimple right there. I was in a freezer, slipped, fell, cracked the front of my head. And at that point, I wasn't able to go to work. I grew up in Eastern Oregon. I got my first job when I was 14 and didn't look back. I loved working. And so not working was kind of a big problem for me. And the only reason I bring this up is because normally someone would experience that and would really hate God for that. But what this had done, despite the constant migraines, I was diagnosed with a post-concussive headache, which means I always have some sort of underlying headache that is severe enough to be distracting. Constant migraines, a lot of light and sound sensitivity, all of that kind of thing. But it gave me the opportunity to dedicate myself full time to the study of the mysteries, which is something that most people aren't given the opportunity to do. So, I was able to spend 10,000 hours. I haven't actually been keeping track of my hours. It's not like that. But, you could say probably at least 10,000 of, I mean, reading enormous books, you know, secret teaching of all ages. Worth it if you're someone who's seeking. Like this one here, I'm reading the chapter on the Hanged Man. This is called the Meditations on the Tarot. This is a really cool one. It's Christian Hermeticism. It was written by someone who wished to remain anonymous and published after their death. They didn't want any credit for it whatsoever. So it's very interesting stuff. And I wouldn't be able to dedicate all that time and energy into any of this without cracking my head open. And I think it's something mildly symbolic that I hit my head and around my third eye. So, you know, the things that we think are destructive and chaotic are the things that cause us to grow. Whenever you read the Norse mysteries, or whenever you read like any of the Norse stories, like I really highly recommend, if you're serious about the Norse mystery school, get Neil Gaiman's book, Norse Mythology. All of his stories are based off of the actual off the poems. They're just kind of modernized a little bit, and you'll find pretty quickly that whenever any of the gods have to engage with the frost giants, they have to leave the confines of Asgard and then go out into the wilds where the frost giants live. They always discover through all that horrendous suffering and all the adventure and all the trouble that it's worth going out there, they always come back with something pretty spectacular. So just because you encounter a frost giant doesn't mean that the world has ended, right? There's actually things that come out of chaos that brings new life and new things into the world. I probably shouldn't chat your ears off for a long time. I just, you know, like I said, it was just kind of one of those days. You know, I had kind of a mild migraine, and my wife was gone, and I was drinking some, which is now cold coffee. And I just wanted to, you know, just visit, tell you a little bit about my story, where I came from. And, you know, people ask me why. So if the mysteries are meant to be secret, and this is, I kind of purposely left this to the last because I want to reward people who stick to the end of things. And if you stuck with me this far, cool. So people ask, if the mysteries are meant to be secret, why have I been teaching this stuff? Traditionally, like I said in my first video, all of this stuff is locked behind the doors of the temple. The only people who see this stuff are the initiates. And you could find versions of this outside of the doors of the mysteries, but it's very hard to find. And you have to do a lot of reading and be able to. You have to have a mind that's really good for spotting patterns, and you could do it. It's just very difficult. You have to do all the legwork yourself. You can't. It's just not just given to you. And I had to do a lot of legwork myself, actually, because the Norse Mystery School is not big, like the Masons are. Anyway, sorry. Rabbit trail. Apologize. Okay, so people ask, if the mysteries are meant to be secret, why are you teaching this stuff? And simply put, the gods are coming back. I mean, I'm not the sort of person who, like, I don't know when or how or what it would even look like. But there is a there is something that is known that that sounds more cryptic than it's meant to be. It's not meant to be so that cryptic. It's the gods are coming back, and when they come back, they're coming back with a bang. And so there's a concerted effort right now to put the mysteries in front of people. If someone is there and is ready to hear it, it has become necessary to give them the opportunity to hear it. Up until this point, typically, like I said, it's locked behind doors. You know, initiates are the doors of the mystery schools have remained closed. Their halls have remained empty, except for there's a few exceptions, like such as the Masons and a few Catholic orders. And I think there might be one or two Commission mystery schools left. Apparently I'm running out of storage space. Anyway, there's a few Commission, which is the Commissions are the ancient Egyptian religion. But there's not many. And we want to, if the gods are coming back, we want to set people free, and we want to give people the opportunity to hear the secrets and be able to do something with them should they need to. And that's what I'm here to do. And that's why I'm told to teach this stuff. You know, I made a deal with God. I made a deal with my teachers that the format is very relaxed. It's not meant to be flashy. It's minimal editing. And it's done that way on purpose. It's done that way so that the people who are meant to hear it will be the ones who are listening to it. So there's specific reasons why it's edited the way it is. Why I don't cut it up and put flashy things in it. I'm not trying to entertain you, I'm trying to teach you. And the people who are here listening to this are more than likely the ones that are supposed to. And so yeah, so again, you know, there's no expectation of belief. You know, I don't need you to believe me. I don't need you to worry. You know, this isn't what this is about. It's just, I want to be honest with people. I want you to know who I am, where I came from, how I got into the mystery school, and how I came, as the Gnostics would say, how I came to the waters. And why I do what I do. I'm doing what I do because the gods are coming back. And, you know, though the people who are meant to be woken up, there's an effort to wake